focus more on methodology and results only.
Right. So we are live. We will just wait for half a minute and then Madam Kulkarni will start the proceedings. Okay?
Yes, sir, we are live.
Yes. So after half a minute, Madam start. Huh?
Okay. Fifteen seconds to go.
We shall make the host and then leave. Huh?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
So shall we start?
Yes, Madam.
Welcome to our journal journey, third episode. Friends, science is ever changing and change is the only constant thing in our life. With COVID pandemic in our background, it is very, very important to remain connected with all the world. We have to remain connected and updated with whole world, the research going on in various parts of the world and the papers published in our country as well. We, the practicing pediatricians and all the viewers, are blessed with presence of Dr. Nimen Mohanty sir as our guide. And all other dignitaries who are present, we welcome them. A journal club is an activity of academically oriented medical persons who critically evaluate the academic literature which is published in reputed journals, which can help their patients, their outcome, and a practical positive way to follow. So for this journal journey, may I invite our president, Dr. Sunita Ingre, for her welcome address.
Thank you, Chitra. It is a pleasure to see you all here today on IIT Raigarh platform for the third edition of this unique journal journey. I welcome the speakers, Dr. Vishal Jali, Dr. Krishna Balamudi, and experts, Dr. Nikhil Shah. It's a pleasure to see you again, sir. And Dr. Vijay Kamble, sir, who is a professor and HOD of Pediatric Department, MGM Navi Mumbai. I also welcome respected Nimen Mohanty sir, Dr. Gangolia sir, Dr. Jai Bhandarkar, Dr. Nilima Neha, and all my dear colleagues and friends. I can see that a lot of efforts and planning has gone into bringing out this third edition of Journal Journey because of the communication which was going back and forth on the group. And of course, Dr. Nimen Mohanty sir is the guiding force for this exclusive academic activity. So it is my compliments to all in regarding this, and hats off to the team. Like I'm sure it will be a wonderful learning session for all. And these are my few brief words. So I'm over to Chitra for the conduction.
Thank you, Dr. Sunita. Now our journal club's guiding force. Dr. Nimen Mohanty sir, please give your blessings and the instructions.
Friends, good evening. The journal club actually started at IIT Raigarh, the initiative taken by stalwarts there. So I'm just assisting them. I'm not the guide, and I'm very happy that things are moving in a right direction. The journal club, as everybody of now, we are all MD pediatrics, so we know what a journal club is, and it really has to be different from a case presentation or a review of a literature. All these things we should know, and everybody knows about it. No need to explain or elaborate this. I don't want to stand before between you and the speakers today. I think at the end, I will have to reserve 2 minutes to say something to our friends rather than now talking too much now. So you please carry on the program. So we'll at the end we'll do that.
Thank you, sir. The basic thing is that we are not supposed to interact live with the speakers or the presenter. Please put all your questions in chat box, and our secretary, Dr. Nilima, will ask those questions after the topics. And for our first topic of critical care, may I request our editor, Dr. Neha Singh, to introduce first presenter, Dr. Vishal Jali, as well as expert, Dr. Nikhil Shah. over to Dr. Neha.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Vishal Jali, pediatrician from MGM Medical College and Hospital, Navi Mumbai. He did his graduation from SDM Medical College, Dharwad, Karnataka, and his post-graduation from MGM Medical College and Hospital, Navi Mumbai. Expert for this first journey would be Dr. Nikhil Shasal. He is a famous pediatric endocrinologist. He did his graduation from Nair Hospital, Mumbai, DNB Pediatrics from Kachi Kamakoti Child Trust Hospital, Chennai, Fellowship in Pediatric Endocrinology from Jahangir Hospital, Pune. There are several in-text publications and one textbook chapter under his name. He was also author of IIP PG teaching modules, Diabetes, Rickets and Bone Disorder in 2018. At present, Dr. Nikhil is working as consultant pediatric endocrinologist and child and adolescent growth specialist in Bharti Hospital, Katio, Cloud9 Hospital, Malad, New Plus Hospital, Borivali, Royal Children Hospital, Kalyan, the Doctors Hub, Ghatkopar, and visiting consultant pediatric endocrinologist at LTMC College and Science Hospital. Now, I would request our first speaker, Dr. Vishal, to please share his presentation and start the journey.
Hello, good evening. I am Dr. Vishal. I am going to talk about a topic which was published in Indian Journal of Pediatrics in July 15, 2021. So the topic is low dose versus standard dose insulin in the management of pediatric diabetic ketoacidosis. So this is a randomized double-blinded controlled trial. So diabetic ketoacidosis is a life-threatening complication in pediatric type 1 diabetes mellitus. The fluid and insulin are the cornerstones of DKA management. After the initial fluid resuscitation, insulin is essential to normalize the hyperglycemia for the correction of acidosis by suppression of lipolysis, ketogenesis, generation of bicarbonate from ketoacid metabolism, and to restore the normal cellular metabolism. So the recent guidelines recommend insulin infusion at a dose of 0.05 to 0.1 units per kg per hour, and the low dose insulin is considered safe and effective despite not proving its superiority over controlled studies. So there are very few studies on this topic, and out of the few articles I read, so most of the study topics are observational, and there are very less interventional topics on this topic. So these are the requirement of the study. So the objective of the study was to compare the efficacy of insulin infusion of 0.05 units per kg per hour versus 0.1 units per kg per hour, which is a standard routinely used dosage in the management of pediatric DKA. So this is a randomized double-blinded controlled clinical trial. So it was conducted in a pediatric critical care division of a tertiary care hospital from October 2014 to July 2018 after institutional ethics committee approval was taken. So informed written consent from parents or legally acceptable representative was obtained. So the children aged 12 years or younger with a diagnosis of DKA were included in the study, and the children with either septic shock or who had already received the insulin before enrollment were excluded from the study. So the intervention was using either low dose, that is 0.05, or standard dose, that is 0.1 units per kg.
I'll just, 1 minute.
Yes.
Can you, inclusion criteria, is it right just taking 12 years or should they be included adolescents?
So actually, according to hospital admission criteria, the pediatric age group there was 12 years. So the hospital admission.
So why I'm asking this is because typically, children younger will require a lower dose of insulin, and children more than 2 years will require more dose of insulin. So even the guidelines say younger children sometimes you can get about 0.05 or 0.03. So that itself is a drawback or the lacuna of the study. So if that included adolescents, it would have made the study much more stronger. So that is one point we need to. Okay, you can.
And the outcome measures. So the primary endpoint was time for resolution of decay. So what is the primary endpoint is something that is decided before the study is begun. So whatever happens beyond that point is not of concern of the researcher. So the primary endpoint in this study was the resolution of decay. So that is the pH more than 7.3 and bicarbonate more than 15 and beta hydroxybutyrate less than 1 millimole per liter. And the secondary outcomes were the rate of fall in blood glucose until 250 mg per dl or less, and the rate of complications, that is either hypokalemia, hypoglycemia, and cerebral edema. So hypokalemia is any potassium levels less than 3.5 or ECG changes, and hypoglycemia was defined in this study as RBS sugar less than 60. So consecutive children 12 years or younger who presented with
Well, again,
DKA
just
defined
comment,
as
sorry.
hyperglycemia.
Just 1 minute. So can you go back to the previous slide?
Okay.
So
Yes, sir.
technically, again, the guidelines say that any RBS less than 70 is hypoglycemia, according to the ISPAT definition. So 50 to 70 they consider as mild to
Okay.
hypoglycemia, and less than 50 is considered as severe hypoglycemia. I'm saying this because they've quoted the ISPAT and they've different cutoffs. You know, that is another mistake which they've made. Yeah, you can carry on.
Okay. The consecutive children 12 years or younger who presented with DKA defined as hyperglycemia more than 200, acidosis less than 7.3, bicarb less than 15, and beta hydroxybutyrate level more than 3. So this is according to the BSPD regimen only. But in that, I read that even children with normal glucose may present with DKA. So this study might have missed some of the DKA with normal blood glucose. The eligible children were randomized into 2 groups. The allocation was concealed in a serially numbered opaque sealed envelopes, and each envelope contained a slip showing the instruction for the preparation of insulin. So the low dose group and standard dose group. So in standard dose group, 50 units of insulin was added in 50 ml of normal saline, so such that 0.1 ml was equal to 0.1 units. And in the low dose group, 25 units was added in the equal same amount of normal saline, such that 0.1 ml was equal to 0.05 units. So this was same for both the groups. The infusion rate was same for both the groups.
So
The
I'll
participants, the treating
just 1 minute again, sorry. So this is the strength of the study. So this is like a double blinded control. So neither the
Yes.
person who's treating, neither the person who's receiving, neither the person who's analyzing knows anything till the end. So this is one of
Yes.
the study. So there is no bias.
Study. Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
The
continue.
participants, the treating team, those administering the medications, investigators, and research personnel who collected data, and study statisticians were unaware of the treatment assignments. The standard dose group received regular insulin of 0.1 units per kg per hour, and the low dose group received 0.05 units per kg per hour. The fluid volume was calculated as a sum of deficit 85 cc per kg and 48 hours maintenance over 48 hours after deducting the initial fluid boluses. So all the children in this study received 20 ml per kg of normal saline in the first hour of resuscitation, or additional 20 ml per kg of normal saline if hypertensive shock. The normal saline was used for the first 6 hours and was changed to half normal saline based on serum sodium and effective osmolarity.
Vishal, just 1 minute. Can you again talk about this fluid calculation? Is it correct according to the ISPAT, or what do you feel?
So according to Milwaukee regimen, the fluid is
Correct.
calculated
But
according to
again, so
24
correct.
hours.
So what they have used is the Milwaukee regimen.
Yes.
They've used a combination of the Milwaukee regimen as well as the ISPAT regimen. So Milwaukee typically talks of this 85 kg as deficit, and they say to replete over 24 hours. So what they have done as by mistake, it is they've done it over 48 hours.
48 hours.
The fluid calculation is entirely wrong because they've quoted ISPAT. So ISPAT characteristically tells us that depending on the type of dehydration. So if it's mild DK, you take as 5%, so it will be 50 ml per kg.
Yes. Moderate to 7%.
We take 7%, so 70 ml per kg. And if it is severe, then you take 10 ml per kg.
10%.
85 ml per kg is absolutely wrong. So there is a basic problem in the methodology itself. So which they have calculated is extra fluid which they are giving, which we do not follow at all right now. So they made a mixture of the Milwaukee protocol as well as the ISPAT protocol. The ISPAT protocol characteristically tells us you follow according to the level of dehydration, that is according to the severity of DK. Now the second point I need to ask you, Vishal, is this bolus part.
Yes.
Are you okay with this bolus being given?
So bolus is actually not given in all the children.
So what happens is,
if the child requires or
over the last 6 years, so many
in this study, all the
guidelines-
children have to.
Sorry, I lost you, Vishal. Sorry.
Sir, actually, in children with who are not in shock, for them directly we can start fluid or 85 ml per kg without
What has
giving
happened,
protocol.
Vishal, is no, over the last 6 years, the ISPAD has changed their guidelines so many times now, all of us are confused. But again, coming back to the paper where they've put the reference, they've used the 2018 guidelines. So 2018 guidelines statistically says that you have to give 10 ml per kg of bolus in mild to moderate decay, and you have to subtract that. And only if the child is having severe decay or is the child is in shock, you give 20 ml. So again, what they've used, the bolus is also wrong. So there are two mistakes in the methodology. One is the total amount of fluid calculated, is the bolus calculation part. Yeah, continue.
Yes. Actually, according to BSP and like
Vishal, your voice is breaking. Vishal, your voice is breaking.
Vishal, you're not audible.
BSPD 2020 PDF. Even in that, they have mentioned ISPAD regime only.
Vishal, we
2018.
lost you for 2 minutes. Vishal, you'll have to go to a better network area.
Actually, your internet
I
is
got confused
unstable.
both the-
Your internet is unstable, Vishal.
Vishal, we have not heard you for last 1 minute, so just go back and start again. Vishal, are you there?
He must be readjusting.
Yes, let us wait.
So I'll speak then.
See,
Vishal.
Yeah.
You're
So-
there?
So what we follow currently is the 2018 ISPAD guidelines or the 2020 BSPD guidelines. So the BSPD, that is the British Society, is based on the ISPAD guidelines only. So what that says is depending on the type of decay, means the severity of decay. If it is 7.2 to 7.3 or bicarb 10 to 15, you take it as mild decay. There you will use as 5% dehydration correction. So it will be 50 ml per kg as the deficit. And then the maintenance, how we calculate is correct according to Milwaukee. But what we need to understand, Milwaukee protocol, which Nelson classically mentions, talks about replacement over 24 hours. We do not follow that at all. We replace it over 48 hours now. So it is deficit over 48 hours plus maintenance over 48 hours. That's how we do it. For moderate, we use 7% dehydration, that is between 7.10 to 7.20. Bicarb, we take it as 5 to 10. And if bicarb is less than 5 or if the pH is less than 7.1, we take it as severe decay. In severe decay, we will take as 10 ml per kg, and you will even have to give a bolus, 100 ml per kg, you will have to give as the deficit, and you will have to give a bolus of 20 ml per kg. So that is how we do it. Yeah, Vishal is back, I think.
Yes, Vishal. Vishal?
Recording.
Yes. Vishal, are you there?
Hello. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yes, sorry for the interruption.
Yeah. No, you're okay.
The normal. Yes, sir. Yes. Shall I continue, sir?
Yes, yes.
Normal
You
saline
were
was used
talking
for
of something BSPD and ISPAD you were talking.
So actually, I read BSPD guidelines of 2020. In that, they
Correct,
mentioned
correct.
both ISPAD and BSPD together. So
Correct.
I got confused with the regimen.
No, that is correct. So BSPD is ISPAD only. So BSPD is derived from ISPAD. So what you read is correct.
Okay, sir.
Yes.
A normal saline was used for the first 6 hours and was changed to half normal saline with osmolality. RBS monitoring was done and fluids were changed accordingly. The insulin infusion was tapered at a rate of 0.01 ml per kg per hour every half hourly. And after the endpoint was achieved, child was shifted to regular subcutaneous insulin with an overlap time of 30 minutes with IV insulin.
Vishal, can you just go
hydrating
back to
fluid
the
after
previous slide?
resuscitation and documentation of. Yes, sir.
So first again, can you comment on the previous slide? Can you comment on this normal saline to 0.45 saline?
So normal saline was used for the first 6 hours and then it was changed to half normal saline. After the correction of
Vishal, your voice is again breaking.
Dr. Nikhil, can you take over?
I'll take over. Yeah. So the thing here we need to understand is ki, we don't typically change to 0.45 normal saline. Only if we feel that the corrected sodium is rising very rapidly, then we take a call. Otherwise, most of the cases you leave it on 0.9 saline only. Second thing is we do not taper the insulin infusion every half an hourly as they've written. We never taper like this. We just follow the insulin infusion. If the sugars start dropping, then after a certain point, we start tapering the insulin infusion. So these all, they've quoted the ISPAT guidelines, but ISPAT guidelines do not mention tapering of the insulin infusion. They do not talk of changing to 0.45 normal saline. They do not talk of fluid calculation like this. So these are the certain errors in their methodology, which is seen here. Next slide.
Vishal, can you go to
Potassium
next slide?
chloride was added to so this is the next slide.
Yeah, but we are not
Potassium
able to...
chloride was added to the rehydrating fluid after resuscitation. Hello, can you hear me? Hello.
Yeah,
Hello.
we can hear you, Vishal. Just go to a better network area.
Your internet is unstable, Vishal.
Use Wi-Fi if possible if there is. Otherwise, use someone else's data.
Yes, sir.
In between, Dr. Nikhil, there is a comment from chat box that they want clear-cut guideline about the fluid resuscitation.
So what I'll do is I'll share the PDF of the BSPD guideline that explains it very well. But again, just to recap everything, first you need to know what type of decay it is. If it is mild decay, that means if your pH is between 7.2 or if bicarb is between 10 and 15, we label it as mild decay. You take as 5% dehydration. If it is moderate decay, where your pH is between 7.1 to 2, or your bicarb is between 5 to 10, you take it as moderate decay, where you take the dehydration percentage as 7%. And if you take it as severe decay, where the pH has to be less than 7.1 and the bicarb has to be less than 5, that is severe decay. There you take it as 10% dehydration correction. So now what we do is, for mild to moderate decay, we give a 10 ml per kg per bolus, which you have to subtract from the entire fluid calculation. For decay, we give 20 ml per kg bolus, which you usually do not have to subtract, especially if the child is having weak pulses and all. Now for the fluid calculation, what we do is fluid calculation is deficit maintenance over 40. So deficit is the depending on the dehydration percentage. So mild 5%, moderate 7%, severe 10%. So if suppose 10 kilo weight child comes with mild dehydration, so what I will do is 50 ml per kg. So that is 500 ml of deficit fluid plus maintenance divided by 48 hours. So maintenance, what typically the ISPAD and the BSPD as well as the Milwaukee says is for the first 10 kilos, we take it as 100 ml per kg. For the next 20 kilo, for the next 10 kilos, so from 11 to 20 kilos, we take it as 1000 ml plus 50 ml per kg. And after 20 kilos, we take it as 20 ml per kg. So all these calculations are very well given in that BSPD PDF. And this you have to divide by 48 hours. So it is deficit plus maintenance divided by 48 hours minus the total bolus given. In mild to moderate, severe, we do not minus the bolus.
Hello.
Yeah, Vishal.
Are you back?
Continuous cardiac monitoring. Yes, sir. Sorry.
Carry on.
Continuous cardiac monitoring was done and potassium was titrated to maintain the normal serum level. Capillary or venous blood glucose was monitored every half an hourly, and beta hydroxybutyrate was monitored 1 hourly by ketone meter. Urine ketone and glucose were monitored 1 hourly by the method, and HbA1c was done at admission.
So Vishal,
Electrolytes.
just 1 minute, go to the previous slide.
Yes.
There are a lot of mistakes in the methodology, so I'm just picking holes in the methodology.
Yes, sir.
We've said we should check sugar half hourly. We do not check sugar half hourly. We check 1 hourly. Checking sugar every half an hourly is barbaric. So 1 hourly is more than enough.
Yes.
Beta hydroxybutyrate, if we have the facilities, we can check. But again, that turns out very expensive. So normally we do not check. Urine ketone is usually not a very effective marker because they're the last thing to get positive. So we usually get blood sugar, VBG. Yeah.
Yes.
Continue.
Electrolytes, glucose and anion gap and effective osmolality monitored 2 hourly for first 6 hours and subsequently 4 hourly till the resolution of ketoacidosis. And the vital signs, intake output, continuous monitoring of the ECG and neurologic assessment was performed. Nutritional status was assessed during the World Health Organization standards. And the assumptions of the mean time for resolution of ketoacidosis in the standard dose group as 20 hours in the low dose and 16 hours, the sample size was calculated with a common standard deviation of 4 hours, a two-sided alpha level of 5% and 95% power. The sample size of 52 DK episodes and considering an attrition rate of 10%. So what is attrition? Attrition is the loss of study unit from a study. So considering a general 10% attrition, 60 participants were enrolled in the study. So the 69 children were screened for eligibility, out of which 5 were excluded from the study as 4 had already received insulin and 1 child had inborn error of metabolism. And so actually this is not given in the exclusion criteria initially. In the exclusion criteria, they just mentioned that any children with septic shock or who have received insulin, the exclusion criteria. But they are not mention any about IEM or any metabolic disorder. And out of 64 were eligible and 4 refused consent. So out of 60, they were randomized into 2 groups of 30, and both the groups received the assigned intervention and were included in the analysis. The baseline characteristics were comparable. So for any study, the 2 parameters we take to reach a conclusion must be comparable and they must not be entirely different. So in this, the low dose group and standard dose group, this is a table showing the basic characteristics. So the mean, yes sir. Hello. Hello.
Continue, Vishal. No problem.
Dr. Vishal, continue and just please try to be brief. We are running little short of time.
No, he has lost his connection. Yeah,
Dr. Nikhil, you can sum up. You can give your expert comments.
Other thing which I felt they've not done in the methodology is they've not divided mild and moderate equally among the 2 groups. They've just talked about overall DK as well as severe DK. So that is one thing the study could have done again, divide equally in mild, moderate in 0.05 group and 0.1 group for mild to moderate as well as severe DK. So that would have given us much better results, whether it is really effective in both the groups. So that is another thing. Should I answer the questions till then?
Yes.
You may answer.
So there are questions in the chat box. Kindly explain the normal glucose decay.
So what the guidelines say and what the textbook says is that you can get decay even with normal blood sugar levels. We've not seen it technically, but sugar every time doesn't have to be more than 200. So typically the guidelines will say any sugar more than 200 with a VPG which shows an acidosis with ketones being more than 2 plus, take it as decay. But sometimes the sugar might be between say 100, 200, but your VPG might be deranged and your ketone. So that is the one thing.
Okay. There is one more question. Do we reassess and depending upon the hydration status, which is changed now, decide the fluid requirement and do the...
No, we just continue the same dehydration because the guidelines are very fixed that we'd have to continue it over 48 hours. So
once we calculate, we have to continue that for 48.
Yes. So maybe 36 to 48 hours. 48 hours might become just too much. So normally what happens is if it's a new case of DK, it will normally require 48 hours of correction. If it's a known case of diabetes, they normally recover very fast. So within 24 to 36 hours, they do recover.
Dr. Nikhil, I have one question.
Yes.
There is one more question in the chat box. Which is the ominous sign in DK having poor prognosis?
So far in my life, I have just lost 1 DK. That was when I did my DCH in Gujarat. Otherwise, I've not lost a DK so far. So normally DK will be messed up only if the doctor messes it up. Otherwise, the DK should not die. That's a simple rule for DK. If the child is going to die, it is because I think the doctor who is messed up. It is not the disease per se itself. Child which we lost in Gujarat was because the child had concomitant sepsis. So the acidosis was just not getting resolved. So that is the reason I think we lost that child there. If you ask me, one sign of PK which I am scared of is altered sensorium, because that means the child might be going into cerebral edema. So if within few hours, if the sensorium doesn't improve, then it is better to treat with cerebral edema, to treat the suspect cerebral edema, keep a low threshold and treat it off by 3% NSA.
One more question is definition of hypoglycemia again. They want it children, neonate and adolescent.
So for diabetes children, the definition of hypoglycemia is different. So what I was talking of definition of hypoglycemia is in type 1 diabetes. So any diabetes child who's having a sugar less than 70, we take it as hypoglycemia. Normally, we take a cutoff is less than 50 in neonates as well as adolescent children, whatever we take it as 50. Neonates with congenital hyperinsulinism, I'll keep a higher cutoff of around 60.
Okay.
So different conditions, there are different cutoffs. So as we are talking about type 1 diabetes here, the cutoff is 70.
70.
Less than 70, take it as hypoglycemia in type 1 diabetes.
And sir, one more question I have. What is exactly tapering of insulin? I didn't get that.
Even I didn't understand that. Why have they written it like that? So normally we do not taper the insulin. Normally if the sugars start dropping below 100, then is when we start tapering the insulin. Otherwise, we don't normally taper the insulin because there is insulopenia. So yes.
Right. Dr. Jay, you can ask your question now.
Nikhil sir, when we're talking about the diabetic cases with normal glucose level, whether that we know diabetic cases are two presentation during infantile or just toddler age and other adolescent due to puberty and due to the infections. Whether that infection is related with the normal glucose level and diabetic ketosis, whether it's sepsis.
But then I don't think your ketones will be 2+ or 3+ in that. And if it's infection related, I don't think so. You're talking is more of a transient hyperglycemia from what I'm understanding is. So there I will not label it as diabetes unless if the ketones are more than 2+ or if there is acidosis. So I do agree sepsis can show acidosis, but ketones should not be 2+ there. So
what another thing, one question was whether what are the poor prognostic sign in diabetic ketosis? Already see altered sensorium. So what are the mistakes done by the treating pediatrician or treating doctor which can edema or chances of edema? Because whether this is the ominous sign or poor prognostic sign.
So what has happened is since long time we've been taught that any DK child give a bolus. So, and bolus we give is 20 ml per kg and all. What we need to understand is the previous guidelines said even if you don't give bolus, it is okay. Again, they've revised the guidelines. So 10 ml per kg of bolus is maximum that you should give, whether it's mild, moderate or severe. So you have to give it over 60 minutes, not over 15 minutes. So 10 ml per kg of bolus for mild, moderate or severe, you give it over 60 minutes. You give only 20 ml per kg of bolus if the child's pulses are weak or if there is poor peripheral perfusion. You do not treat it as shock unless you have features of shock. Okay. So that's one thing. Second thing is start the insulin at least 1 to 2 hours after starting the bolus, after starting the IV fluid. So these are the two major mistakes which we yet do because we follow the Milwaukee protocol. And unfortunately, the Milwaukee protocol is very, very predated, almost obsolete.
Okay.
Yeah, I could, can I interrupt? I could see Dr. Mahesh Mohite also who has joined. Sir, please give your inputs. Dr.
Sorry,
Mahesh?
I missed out on the initial part of it. But what protocol we follow today is basically BSPID.
Yes, we follow the BSPD.
BSPID, and the present ISPD is almost following the BSPID, which came from British almost 4 years ago. And ISPD is almost taken up everything which is come in BSPID.
No, sir. BSPD
so the fluid volume that you give. No, ISPAD
yes.
was first, then came BISPAD. Now it's a ISPAD which is revised, which is most of the recommendation taken from BISPAD. Almost everything is followed from that.
So
first was ISPAD.
Yes, sir.
First was ISPAD, then came BISPAD.
So in short, both guidelines are same.
You more than 3 pH, mild and severe variety, and then change totally. So your Milwaukee regime, which was giving such a huge volume and causing highest possibility of death because of extra volumes, is now totally rejected by BISPAD, and we are landing up giving half the maintenance volume. So for say first 10 kg, it was 2 ml per kg, 10 to 21 ml per kg, sorry, 1 ml per kg, and then 10 to 12, so more than 20 ml, I suppose it's just 1 ml per kg per day, per hour. So that was kind of a protocol that we follow. And with that, the mortality is almost gone to zero, nearly zero. As far as your volumes are concerned, the boluses, there is nothing like bolus unless the patient is hypotensive. And otherwise, it's just 10 ml per kg to be given in first hour. And mind you, insulin should not be started in first 1 hour, because the bolus that you give, whatever 1 of 10 or 20 ml per kg, that will build up the intravascular volume, which push out that sugar which is extra there. So just by giving the bolus itself, the sugar will drop down significantly. And later on, you will be giving insulin to take a sort of further counter that sugar. Barring that, as far as research part is concerned, I think what he told us is few of the patient had to be removed from the study. That's not a standard of care, because there is one concept called as intention to treat analysis. In the intention to treat analysis, if you change your protocols during the course of the study, then it is taken as a very weak study. One more thing is the attrition rate. If the attrition rate is more than 15%, that is also taken as a poor study. So those are kind of limitations. I just heard the last 10-15 minutes part of it. I had a crashed baby, so I was busy in that. So that's what we follow today. We do follow the revised BISPAD, which is actually most of the protocols taken from BISPAD, wherein the ketone is not 3, ketone, I mean not 2, it should be more than 3 to diagnose upfront. As far as acidosis is concerned, it's just mild or severe. So mild is less than, or severe is less than 7.1 pH, and mild is 7.1 to 7.3 pH. And the bicarb level that we take is by less than, so bicarb level that you take is, please.
So BSPD 2020, so BSPD 2020 critically says that you classify again it as mild, moderate, or severe.
Okay, again it has come back.
It has come back, sir. So what?
I'm not aware of that.
2016, 2014 guidelines.
Yeah, first BSPD. Initially it was only ISPD, then came the BSPD.
Correct. So now BSPD is updated 2020 now, sir.
Okay, I'm not aware of that.
Moderate and severe. So that mild and severe concept has gone again out of the window.
Okay.
Latest guidelines say that if it is less than 7.3, it is mild. Less than 7.2, it is moderate. And less than 7.1, it is severe.
Perfect. And basically, I feel this part which came first was much more easy for the clinician to follow, because the severity of hydration was based on the pH which you get. So less than 7.
Same thing is the current BSPD.
One will be something like 10% and 7. But in that case, what is the volume? Because less.
So
was
take it as
10%
mild,
and above 7.1, it was 5%.
So if you take it as mild DK, sir, we take it as 5% dehydration correction. If you take it as moderate DK, it is 7% dehydration.
How much volume loss? Because
50 ml per kg. 70. So 50 ml per kg for mild, moderate it is 70 ml per kg, and severe is 100 ml per kg. The new guidelines are very.
We are going just with 2 numbers. Okay. So that was one. The second was and this, and plasma ketone was standard of care, more than 3 millimoles. And other major difference was basically no shifting from normal saline to half normal saline or something, which used to fall in the ISPAD previously. So that.
Excuse me, I have one question here, sir. Sir, I have got one query. If we are facing a patient of milder dehydration, or maybe mild moderate dehydration, is it possible that we correct dehydration in first 1 hour with normal saline, and then we don't put the patient on drip, but we keep on giving boluses every 2 to 3 hours?
No. Okay. You cannot give boluses. You have to give on an IV drip. So in the chat box, someone has asked, can we monitor DK in the ward? Yes, absolutely. In a resource limited setting, in Vadia, they are monitoring it in the ward only. So mild DK can easily be managed in the ward. Depending on the availability of sisters and all the monitors and all, either we give infusion or we can subcute infusion. So just the guidelines are slightly different for subcute. So we'll discuss at a later on time.
Yeah,
but
thank you.
Mild, moderate,
only that you have to set up the ICU in your ward. That's the only difference. Whether you call it as ICU or ward, I mean, it's the periphery. When
Yeah.
we didn't have the
Thank-
high-tech ICU, now we have everything high-tech, so we can do that. So we have been doing it.
Sir,
Just follow the new guidelines.
may I take 1 or 2 minutes just to
Sure,
share my
100%.
experience?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, only one experience, just 15, 20 days back or maybe a month back. I don't know whether there is MGM person, resident over there who is attending this CME. There was a 12, 13 years old female child presented to me in classical DKA. Sugars were around 230, 260 in between that. Because as such, we don't manage. That's the reason I have asked the question whether can we manage the decay in a ward or in non-ICU settings. So that patient was referred to physician because physician generally manage those patients. Physician said that it is not a decay. Then this patient was altered sensorium, referred to government setup. From there, this patient landed in MGM hospital. Patient was ventilated for around 10 to 12 days. And then patient recovered totally normal. Patient had come for follow-up yesterday only. I could see that she was bang normal with regular insulin doses. So that patient I would have definitely managed. But I thought it's not the time I should take the call for that patient particularly. But looking at this CME, I think it has become like more simplified version of managing the DKA. So thank you for nice inputs from both of you.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
want to
Thank
ask
you all the
Dr.
doctors.
Yeah, I just want to ask Dr. Mohita one question. Sir, what is the incidence of ventilation in DK? Because I have rarely seen a DK get ventilated. So,
Very rarely.
Yeah.
Very rarely. Only reason where we ventilate is they start developing cerebral edema. So it's your mistreatment rather than the patient condition. So if the patient lands up on ventilator, perhaps either he has come too late or you are given too fast fluids too early, which was not required. Yeah.
Thank you all the doctors. And now may I invite our young dynamic Raigad IIP editor, Dr. Neha, to introduce our second topic, presenter Dr. Krishna and expert Dr. Kamble sir. Over to Neha.
Yes, ma'am. After our first journal presentation from Dr. Vishal, followed by discussion and expert scientific opinion from Dr. Nikhil sir, now we move forward and I would invite our second speaker, Dr. Krishna Balamudi from MGM Medical College and Hospital, Navi Mumbai. She has done her graduation from MGM Medical College, Jamshedpur, Jharkhand, and her post-graduation from MGM Medical College, Navi Mumbai. She has done few research papers and presentation. At present, she is working as SR in MGM Medical College and Hospital, Navi Mumbai. And for our second journal, we have Dr. Vijay Kamble sir as an expert. He is senior consultant pediatrician from Navi Mumbai. Sir is professor and HOD of pediatrics in MGM Medical College and Hospital, Navi Mumbai. Now requesting our second speaker, Dr. Krishna, please share your presentation and you can start.
A very good evening to everyone present. The second article that we'll be discussing today is estimating global and regional disruptions to routine childhood vaccine coverage during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, which was a modeling study conducted by Kossi et al., who are employed at the University of Washington, Seattle. This study was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and published in the Lancet on 15 July 2021. So before we move into the study itself, I'd like to give a little bit of a background on why we should be discussing this study. The WHO Director General last year gave the statement that vaccines are one of the most powerful tools in the history of public health, and more children are being immunized than ever before. But we have seen that this pandemic has put those gains at risk, and the avoidable suffering and death which is caused by children missing out on routine immunization could be far greater than COVID-19 itself. It doesn't have to be that way, and vaccines can be delivered safely even during the pandemic. So this is a call out to every doctor to ensure that these life-saving programs continue. Especially this is of particular relevance to India because our country contributes to almost 1/5 of the global under 5 mortality, with a significant number of deaths attributable to vaccine preventable diseases. Basically, we have seen also that the global gains in childhood vaccine coverage have stalled in recent years, and most locations have already fallen short of the 90% global coverage targets in 2019. And additional declines in vaccination rates pose massive risks to child health as well as survival. So we've had a number of studies assess this disruption. There was a systemic review of almost 17 observational studies which found consistent declines in vaccine coverage and administered doses across locations and over time. The 20th meeting of the Emergency Committee under International Health Regulation noted that ongoing COVID-19 transmission continues to pose a risk to polio eradication efforts as well. There was also an analysis that was carried out across 21 countries in the initial half of 2020, where it was found that disruptions of almost up to 90% were seen in routine immunization programs. So talking about this article, we are all aware of the fact that SARS-CoV-2 has rapidly spread worldwide in early 2020, and health services, especially routine immunization, faced severe disruptions. Some of the reasons that could be attributed to this would be travel restrictions and policies which aim to reduce person-to-person contact and social mixing, the deployment of health personnel for the COVID-19 response, and cancelled or postponed patient visits because of concerns of viral exposure. There have been a number of studies which have sought to quantify this impact, but all of these studies were limited to either specific locations or to certain time periods, especially the initial part of the pandemic, or both. This study, however, is unique in the sense that it is the first modeled quantitative analysis of global and regional disruptions to vaccination coverage by month during the COVID pandemic in 2020. So this is to help strengthen routine immunization data systems by making data-informed decisions at local levels, as well as improve monitoring of routine immunization over time. One thing that we need to understand before we go into the methodology is that what is a modeling study? So a modeling study is basically something, it's an analytical methodology that accounts for events over time and across populations. So whenever it is either impossible or impractical to create experimental conditions in which scientists can directly measure outcomes, we do a modeling study. And we should also remember that direct measurement of outcomes under controlled conditions is always more reliable as compared to modeled estimates of outcomes. So in methodology, so what did they do in this study? First of all, what they did was they synthesized available administrative data and electronic records with a two-step model of monthly DTP3 and MCV1 disruptions in 2020. And then they quantified these disruptions attributable to COVID-19 on the basis of expected 2020 coverage levels. Where did they get this expected levels from? It was from the Global Burden of Disease, Injuries and Risk Factors Study 2020, Release 1 report, which provided as a vaccine coverage model. And then after quantifying these disruptions, they calculated the additional number of children who missed DTP3 and MCV1 doses over the course of 2020. So for where did the data, how did they collect the data? They collated reports by countries to regional WHO offices, then supplemented this with published literature, Ministry of Health websites, and media reports. So they included all dose or coverage data representative at the national level or first administrative unit for children aged 0 to 59 months, monthly patterns in 2019 to 20 to capture trends in eligible populations and corresponding coverage, and the data on 3-dose coverage of any diphtheria containing, tetanus containing, and pertussis containing vaccine for DTP3 model, and 1-dose coverage of any measles containing vaccine for the MCV1 model. So also another thing that I'd like to add here is that why did they specifically take up the DTP3 and MCV1 vaccines as a measure of the success of a vaccination coverage is because DTP3 coverage has been universally taken as a marker for immunization coverage within and across countries. And measles containing vaccine, again, they have also taken vaccines which have been covered globally. So measles and DTP3 are two vaccines which are globally given. Then who were excluded from this study? So whichever regions did not have data of the full month of March 2020, they were excluded. Any discrepancy which occurred between administrative data reports and qualitative sources. What were these qualitative sources? Basically, WHO and partners, including Gavi and UNICEF, provided this qualitative data with 2 pulse poll results, essential health service polls. So they compared these two, and if there was any discrepancy within the 2 data reports, then those data were excluded. Also excluded was if there was a more than 20% decrease seen in the most recent month of data and the corresponding ratio for the previous month, that was excluded, so that any potential reporting delays could be excluded out of that. Then CDRs, or cumulative disruption ratios, from countries for which there was an alternative source of administrative data. So these were all the CDRs or the data that were excluded. So what did they analyze? They analyzed the cumulative disruption ratio, which is a formula that they calculated. The doses administered, number of doses administered from March to month M 2020 divided by the dose March to month in 2019, and that was divided by the dose from Jan to Feb in 2020 to Jan to Feb in 2019. So the Jan to Feb is basically the baseline values that were taken, and then the cumulative disruption ratio was calculated. Then we had also, what they also did was they took into account the cumulative human mobility estimates. What does this mean? Basically, it reflects how people changed behaviors. So cumulative mobility estimates were calculated using the average percentage reduction in mobility, where 0 signified no reduction in mobility and 1 signified 100% reduction in mobility. This was to account for the time-varying effects of the pandemic on routine immunization. So then how did they estimate disruptions attributable to COVID-19? First, what they did was the average relationship between cumulative disruption ratios, disruptions in human mobility and vaccine coverage was modeled. Then whatever residual variation was there in disruption by month was modeled. And then they combined the results of the two, and a trend in disruption estimates throughout 2020 was calculated. So this is a graph, basically they're graphs which are showing how model performance for step 1, where what was done was the cumulative disruptions in mobility and vaccine coverage. The first row that we see is signifying India. The A is where you have the mobility and vaccine coverage. Then step 2, that is involved modeling residual variation, and third is the monthly mobility patterns, and fourth is the monthly vaccine disruption patterns. So as we can see also, April was the maximum disruption that was seen in almost all the countries. Then there were other covariates that were considered, for example, total COVID-19 deaths and cases to date, indices of development, health system performance, all these were considered, but there was no meaningful association that was found out in the study related to the disruption. What were the results that were found through the study? So they found that there was a 76.7 coverage for DTP3, expected was 83.3% and 78.9% for MCV1 with an expected of 85.9. What this meant was that 30 million eligible children remained without doses of DTP3, and 27.2 million children did not receive MCV1 doses. Globally, DTP3 coverage estimates for 2020 was 7.7% lower, and 7.9% MCV1 coverage estimates were lower than expected. So attributable to the pandemic, an 8.5 million additional children missed doses of DTP3, and 8.9 children missed doses of MCV1. So the disruptions were most severe in April 2020, and there was recovery seen in quite a few countries from May and December 2020 with vaccine delivery, where vaccine delivery services did appear to improve. Another thing that they found in this was that The largest acute declines were found in the South Asia super region, which includes India, with DTP3 doses administered falling by 58.3% and MCV1 doses falling by 43.1% in April 2020. At the end of 2020, the highest number of additional children who were estimated to have missed DTP3 and MCV1 doses were 3.6 million and 2.2 million children in the region of South Asia. So this is a graphical representation of the same, where the estimated number of children, eligible children who missed doses of DTP3 and MCV1 globally and by GBD super region from January to December 2020 are seen. So the red is basically South Asia, which we can see. Then these are the numbers that they were able to find out. Like in South Asia, 88% was the expected coverage. However, there was a disruption of 13%, and therefore there was only 76.6% of DTP3 administration. And in MCV, 91.6 was supposed to be the estimated coverage. There was a disruption of 7.4%, so only 84.6% of the eligible population were vaccinated with MCV1. So what do we learn from this? So basically, the absence of catch-up and expansion efforts will increase the heightened risk of, will heighten the risk of vaccine-preventable diseases in 2021 and beyond, especially as the world comes back to pre-COVID-19 interaction levels. This is going to be heightened. We have seen that in the short term, the transmission risk of vaccine preventable diseases have been temporarily maybe mitigated because of the use of masks, physical distancing, and other types of preventive behaviors that have been practiced during the pandemic. The disruptions to routine immunization programs were large and pervasive, and we have seen that even previously, that as evidenced by past epidemics and modeling exercises, if there have been substantive gaps in vaccine coverage, it will increase the risk for vaccine preventable disease outbreaks once COVID-19 preventive measures subside. And there have been studies also which have shown that a potential 10% increase in mortality from vaccine preventable diseases can be expected. And work has also shown that large disruptions to the vaccine program will increase the polio cases in endemic countries. We have seen previously also the 2014 Ebola virus epidemic in West Africa also led to large disruptions in routine immunization. And subsequently, there was a measles outbreak that was seen throughout that region as well. So we need to keep in mind that why are vaccine services particularly prone to disruptions? One is specific. One of the reasons is the close contact between recipients and vaccinators. Also, other ways in which COVID-19 affected this was supply and facility constraints, also fear of SARS-CoV-2 exposure in healthcare settings. So what have countries done to adapt routine immunization services? They have leveraged pre-existing program strengths. They have incorporated protocols for safer vaccination administration. So health workers have provided vaccine services outside clinics, including home-based visits, drive-through vaccination, short-term vaccination posts at schools, banks, supermarkets, pharmacies. Then also activities altered to reduce crowding and physical contact while providing sufficient PPE. We can also reduce exposure risk by setting up tents outside health centers, extending hours or requiring appointments to reduce crowding. Globally, what measures can be taken is by leveraging COVAX investments for routine immunization functions and broader catch-up efforts to also reach zero-dose children and underserved communities. This is of particular importance because of the fact that existing gaps, the pre-existing gaps in immunization coverage will be even further entrenched because of this pandemic. So it is important that we make sure that expansion also happens and underserved communities are also served. What were the obstacles that countries will face is that these efforts will have to be carried out amid continued transmission of source SARS-CoV-2 as new variants keep emerging. Also, there is a strain on health systems because of the mass COVID-19 vaccine rollouts. And also, there has been exacerbation of inequalities in access to and the reach of routine immunization against the backdrop of rising poverty in many countries. So in this study, there were quite a few limitations that were there. So of which basically, first of which was that monthly vaccine data were not available for all locations over time. And changes in administrative data might not correspond to changes in coverage. So this data generally excludes our doses provided outside of target schedules and supplemental immunization activities, and therefore might not fully capture the catch-up vaccination. Also, they were not able to fully account for potential reporting delays and data quality challenges associated with the ongoing pandemic. And also, if there were stockouts or reporting anomalies during the baseline months, that's January to February, then that could skew estimated effects of the disruption to routine immunization. So that was the second limitation that was there during in this study. Another thing is that the mobility measures, that means basically how people moved about during the pandemic, they are imperfect proxies for the broader societal effects of the pandemic and might not fully represent behavioral changes. Also, this study did not include uncertainty in the estimates of human mobility or size of the target population for vaccination. So all the uncertainties in the analysis was not included. Then another limitation was that the step 1 model of this study, it assumes that there was a constant relationship between mobility and vaccine coverage. But we see that the results of the step 2 model show that coverage has generally increased faster than relative mobility. Why this was there? Probably because there was adaptation of service delivery models and conduct catch-up vaccination in ways that involve less overall population movement. So that was another drawback. Then another thing that was there is that what the currently available data that we have was limited to total aggregate numbers of doses delivered at the national level. And this study also as such produces aggregate estimates of disruption. However, they did not take into consideration the effects of the pandemic on routine immunization coverage on subnational geography, sex, ethnicity, race, income, migrant or refugee status, or other important factors. So it is important that we need to, it had to be like disaggregated data needed to have been collected and analyzed as well, because for groups inadequately represented by traditional health information systems, it will be important to ensure greater equity in provision of routine immunization services to them as well. So in conclusion, we need to improve routine immunization data systems and delivery models. Recovery efforts need to concentrate on accelerating and monitoring catch-up vaccination initiatives, as well as expand services to children historically missed or underserved by routine immunization programs. And what this pandemic has taught us is that we need to build an adaptive and resilient routine immunization program so that we are able to provide more equitable and a sustainable vaccine service for everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Krishna. And now the expert comments, Kamle sir. Dr. Vijay Kamle.
Good evening, everybody. Actually, we are behaving as per rules set by the coordinators. That is, first the presenter has completed his presentation. Dr. Krishna had done a work very well done. Then I will be having few comments, then the questions will be asked. So I will make comment that is a really commendable work, and choice of the article most is done by Dr. Nimai Mohanty. Probably one was clinical and this is the some planning or analytical article. And this article being from the international journal, it seems to be little complicated. Lot of statistics is involved, but that is the beauty and the evidence-based approach by carried out by the outside people, that research thing has not still percolated in India. We are still afraid of lot of statistics, and this is because we don't take into consideration the statistics or planning things. So planning first. That is why you can see the difference between the first article and this article, how well planned these are, what is the rationale. So whenever any choosing this research questions has to be first frame out. So if that research questions is perfect, then your article will be accepted everywhere. There will be no criticism from the thing. So as everybody is reading Indian Pediatrics, at the end it is written what is already known and what this new study adds. So can you summarize this question by me, Dr. Krishna? So what is already known and what this study adds? So can you give, because that is the typical Indian pediatric question at the end into the box. So
Yes.
Can you summarize, Krishna?
Yes, Dr. Krishna, please summarize
Okay, so
what it adds, especially.
So we already had studies which were showing disruptions to the routine immunization programs during the pandemic. However, they were all limited to specific locations and limited to certain time periods or both. However, this study not only provides a modeled estimate of the disruption globally and regionally, but it also provides an estimate of the disruption throughout 2020. So we can see the trend of recovery as well, and how we can add to this as well. So this was basically it was a study which was quantitative, gave us specific numbers, and showed us the trend throughout the year as well as globally. So that was something that
So it was an observational study.
Yeah, it was an observational study, but it was modeling study, as she has been showing, because this is what whenever we come. One more question, and then I will talk. So who has done this study? What were the conflicts of interest in this study? Was it to promote vaccine production or any other conflict of interest? Everybody can see there must be, because we are giving, everybody says it is our bread and butter, pediatricians. So do you think any conflict of interest in this study, Krishna?
So this was definitely funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is basically the Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccine initiative, which is there. It was funded by them. However, the study itself, they have stated that they had no role in the study design or the data collection or analysis or interpretation or writing of the report. So ideally, yes, there shouldn't be any sort of a conflict, but the fact that they have funded this.
If they have stated there is no conflict of interest, there is definitely no conflict of interest, because we can think this is supported by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is the very good supporter of the Gavi, and they are doing very good work, but their research work is different. So there is no conflict of interest, and it is published in very nice journal. So this may go into, people might think, because there are many anti-vaxxers, so they can go and no, it is for the vaccine thing. So this modeling study, what is modeling study? You already said, but I will just say modeling study as just for planners, be it of any national planning commission, etc. They will think of this modeling study. Modeling studies are coming since last 20 years, and it is last 10 years they are used in industry, planning, everywhere they are used in a very large quantity. They have been modified, they have been sophisticated, all these modeling studies. See, so this is one of the sophisticated modeling study based on previous experience and what we can do in the future. So these are the modeling studies. So this is probably maybe the future, what we can do. So we have to, I have not mastered it, but everybody has to, the researchers have to master this sort of studies and go ahead with the studies, especially for planners. These studies are there. Another question is regarding vaccine preventable disease outbreak. They may be present if the vaccine disruption occurs. So in India, what is the situation of this? You have given the global thing, but in India, what is the coverage of DPT3 and measles containing virus vaccines? Any previous data is available, Krishna, you know of?
Yes, sir. So basically, this study at least says that South Asia, which includes India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka.
I'm concerned about India. What is the state of vaccination coverage in India? Any figures are there?
Sir, I'm not aware of the number.
Okay, so I will just give you the basic idea. At BCG, maybe 98 to 99%. DPT3 is around 70%. Measles is very less actually. It is around 62 to 63%. So child or infant, never, many of the 35 to 40% Indian children hardly receive measles because they forget. There is a gap. DPT3 and measles 9 months, so everybody forgets, and that is why the government is very keen on measles surveillance and measles vaccinations also. And here in this COVID, you can see the thing, overall study coverage of measles containing virus has dropped to even around 43% or so in Southeast Asian region. So that was very drastic, and this can probably produce the measles outbreaks in future. So no, I cannot, but prediction is there. The measles can be outbreak can happen. That is why the WHO, as you must have known, Dr. Katkar, who is a local WHO surveillance officer, who is so much behind all these surveillance system and reporting of fever with rash and other also vaccine preventable disease. So we have to support that thing, that initiative by WHO. Any other observation? Can I ask one question to audience? Any other outbreaks you expect or have you experienced in this other than the vaccine preventable disease? Any other outbreaks? Are you seeing any other disease patient commonly into your practice?
Large number of dengue patients are seen, sir. Right now.
Dengue, yeah.
Sir, dengue, few of chikungunya, and mostly flu.
Yeah, flu. So that has increased because probably, I don't know, but masking has been decreased, so that may be the reason for a flu, and the people have become little careless. So the mosquito bearing and probably rainy season also is little prolonged. Today we are facing also the rains, that thing. So that has created the mosquito bonus, and in the areas where mosquitoes were not there, now we are seeing a lot of mosquito. But here, as MGM experience, I can say that we are getting lot of MDR TBs somehow in our hospital, because for 6 months they were at home only, they were not coming out, they are not taking medicines. So MDR TB's rate has increased substantially in our thing. And one more thing is severe acute malnutrition. I was able to say proudly some 1 year, 1.5 years, there is no severe acute malnutrition case in Raigad. But in last 4 months, we have seen 4 severe acute malnutrition cases. So that also has been because the coverage of government is not there. So some outbreaks may come up, so that we have to monitor all this.
Yeah, Dr. Nilima, please ask the questions from chat box.
The answer to Dr. Kamlesar's question, which diseases now we are seeing in increase, Dr. Patankar has said flu, and Dr. Neha Singh has said lot of skin infections she is seeing in her OPD. Yeah. And one more thing I wanted to ask, in the study Dr. Krishna presented, it was a sentence that endemic countries, the countries which are still endemic for polio, there is a rise in polio. So I don't know, our neighboring countries are endemic for polio still?
Yeah,
which are the countries?
Nigeria, Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Afghanistan, Pakistan.
Neighboring countries, Afghanistan and Pakistan, where the cases were found, I have heard, but now I don't know. Now you know?
No, I also don't know the statistics. Probably Dr. Khatkar, WHO, he may be able to answer. We can ask that how much polio has been there, and seeing the condition in Afghanistan and reporting will be very poor in this situation. So that question is doubtful now. So that will.
I have got one input over here, sir.
Okay.
Somewhere she said, Dr. Krishna said that there will be resurgence of various communicable infections in near future, or maybe after a few years, since the vaccinations are going down. I mean, number of vaccinations are going down. So one point I would like to make over here is that in some 20-25 odd infections which we are supposed to report to government, I mean, pediatricians, they don't seriously report these diseases to government, and few of them are vaccine preventable diseases. So it should be made mandatory to all pediatricians to report all infectious diseases which they come across, like measles and rubella and rest other infections. Unless we do report all these diseases seriously, we will not come to know the exact statistics of resurgence of infection, if at all we have in near future. So that was my input. Dr. Mohanty or somebody else can speak over it.
Yeah, very right, sir. So may I say something, sir?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay. A very good presentation, Dr. Vishal Jali and Dr. Krishna. Why we kept these two topics? Actually, selection of topics, not necessarily that the topic should be ideally done. There should be a lot of scope for discussion and criticism.
Right.
That is why these topics are selected. The first topic, which is a indigenous topic rather in our own journal, see, so much of discrepancies could be pointed out by our expert. See, these initially, actually, we had instructed our young faculties to discuss after your result is out. Then only you, parawise you discuss. So he was a little hesitant when he was being interrupted by experts' comments. So then his internet was not fine. But that topic was excellent topic, having lot of scopes for discussion.
Right.
It's not how ideally things are done. This is not a review or a academic discussion. This is to discuss how ideally research should be done, what are the flaws. This should have been brought out. And he could bring out everything. And Krishna, you should, in the end, you should give a message to our community. Why this topic was here was this disruption of the immunization in the COVID pandemic. Rightly, you have already pointed out, these vaccine preventable diseases are many, but only few repetitive samples like DPT and measles were picked up, because this was included in maximum global programs in all the countries. So a global topic has to be taken, not analyzing every vaccination. The message to our own practitioners is that their vaccine preventable disease may come up more and more. And what is the message that we should pick up more the renewal of the vaccine, that is adult vaccines or adolescent vaccines or the missed vaccines which has been, we should speed up that. Whatever the disruption already occurred, but these missed opportunities should be attended to. This message should go to our practitioners, and our own doctors, practitioners have very good database of their own patients, who has come, who has not come. So you can send them messages, at least late than never, better late than never, we should do it. See, the topic, what participation we anticipated, the first episode of the journal journey was, the topics were selected by the presenter themselves. Second time, we requested them to volunteer. Let the volunteers come up with their own topics. While searching topics, at least one person will go through 4 and 5 topics to select a topic. So in that process, by force, you get to know so many articles. That was the whole idea. And ultimately, we decided these two topics to show the both ends of the spectrum. One in Indian scenario, the other is Lancet, where such topics can be taken up as a epidemiological, pediatric epidemiology, how they have done it. And we have so much of data, we're not using it. It's not necessarily we do basic research every time in your own clinical side. See, National Family Health Survey, they have 4 now so far. So much of data is available. But we can also, similar topics we can publish, analyzing this available data, which is massive. So this was the whole idea to give you our own practitioners can also publish and bring out these topics for discussion. Thank you. I will not take much of time now. You can carry on the next program.
Yeah, Dr. Jay wants to add something.
Madam, 1 minute. Dr. Nikhil is there? Dr. Nikhil is there?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
There is one question on the YouTube channel. How often ABG is done?
We normally we don't do ABGs, we do VBGs. So VBG roughly say 12 hourly, 8 to 12 hourly is okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr.
I have one
Jay.
question.
Yes.
Kamlesh sir, when you're talking about the disruption of vaccine during COVID period, right?
Yeah.
Are there any vaccines that increase also in the COVID period? Why?
Flu vaccine.
Vaccine must be the answer.
Flu vaccine.
Flu vaccine definitely has increased our IAP recommendation. So recommendation definitely carry, but for recommendation we have to have good studies. So this recommendation was backed by good studies. So the flu vaccine has increased, awareness has increased. One more thing regarding why these studies are coming up, because see, if you are seeing the disruption, and as I said, in India the coverage is less, and you have seen the CoWIN app, the importance and utility of CoWIN app. So in future, my thing is that my estimate or my guess is that such apps or more internet-based vaccine providers may come into the market. Like there is a 1mg or whatever thing. So internet-based vaccine providers are come into the market during COVID. Not only the change has happened into the people's buying capacity, internet-based capacity. So this is also one, I cannot say competitor, but that competitor can happen into the market. So as a thing, we have to provide our communication skills to increase for greater care of the children, to give the quality vaccines rather than taking the vaccines from. So that is, I think, maybe the IAP's responsibility, or some study needs to be done, because you cannot say how the market, because most of this, as I said, vaccine, people say it is a market driven, but everything is market driven. So we have to take better care, because app-based vaccinations and other kind, they will show that it is evidence disruption has occurred. So we have to provide the vaccines at particular. So this we have to be strengthen our strength by doing the education of parents as well as government. And flu vaccine has done. So that is my just guesstimates you can say. So with this, I think I will stop my commentary on this thing. If any other questions, we can discuss.
Dr. Nilima, shall I invite Dr. Sanjeevani now?
Yeah.
We are nearing the end of the program. Dr. Sanjeevani, vote of thanks.
संजीव मॅडम आहेत का?
हो आहे, दिसतात ते. डॉक्टर संजीवनी. Neha, please go for a vote of thanks then. I think I'm able to see her, but she's mute. Dr. Sanjeevani, please unmute.
Neha madam.
Neha ma'am, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
On
Please
behalf-
give vote of thanks.
Yes. On behalf of IP Raigad, I would like to thank all the speakers, Dr. Vishal sir and Dr. Krishna, for wonderful presentation. And I would also like to thank our both speakers, Dr. Vijay Kamble sir and Dr. Nikhil sir, for their scientific expert opinions. I would like to thank our President, Dr. Sunita Ingle ma'am, and our Secretary, Dr. Nilima Bhandarkar ma'am. I would also like to thank Dr. Chitra Kulkarni ma'am, Dr. Sampath Sahasani sir, Dr. Niman Mohanty sir, Dr. Jay Bhandarkar sir, Dr. Hemant Gangolia sir, and all the Dr. Mohite sir, Dr. Ava Patalkar sir, and Dr. Rajendra Chandorkar sir, and all the attendees on YouTube and Zoom who have attended this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks a lot. It was a very successful program, and we again thank Niman Mohanty sir to attend throughout and give us the guidance. Looking forward for a few more programs and more interesting and number of participation in coming journal journeys. Thank you.
Volunteers, please.